When they thought they'd taken everything from me, my career, my reputation, my entire future, I simply smiled. Because in the silence of my downfall, I had already planted the seeds of their destruction. The person who inherited my position, who stood on the ruins of everything I'd built, never suspected they were walking into a trap 12 months in the making. They celebrated too early, trusted too easily, and believed their victory was complete. But revenge, real revenge, isn't served cold. It's served when they're standing at their highest peak, completely unaware that the ground beneath them is already crumbling. My name is Emily Hart, and until 6 months ago, I was somebody. 37 years old, senior portfolio manager at Stratwell & Knox, one of Manhattan's most prestigious financial firms. 12 years I'd given to that glass tower on Wall Street, 12 years of 60-hour weeks, missed birthdays, and relationships sacrificed on the altar of ambition. From my corner office on the 42nd floor, I could see the Hudson River cutting through the city like a silver blade, and I'd earned every inch of that view. The morning everything changed started like any other. November rain streaking the windows, the familiar burn of black coffee against my throat, the soft hum of Bloomberg terminals creating a symphony of capitalism. I remember adjusting my Armani blazer, checking my phone for overnight market movements from Tokyo and London. My team was already assembled in the conference room, waiting for our weekly strategy meeting. We managed $3 billion in assets, and every decimal point mattered. Stratwell & Knox wasn't just a workplace. It was an ecosystem of predators dressed in designer suits. You learned quickly that paranoia wasn't a weakness here, it was a survival skill. Every smile in the elevator could hide a knife aimed at your back. Every casual lunch invitation might be reconnaissance for your next rival. I'd navigated these waters successfully for over a decade, turning myself from a middle-class girl from suburban Ohio into someone whose decisions moved millions. The office itself was a monument to American corporate excess. Italian marble floors that clicked under your heels like a countdown clock. Original Rothko paintings in the executive hallway that cost more than most people's homes. A private dining room where deals were made over Wagyu beef and bottles of wine worth more than my first car. This was the kingdom I'd fought to enter, and I'd finally claimed my place among its nobility. But kingdoms fall, and sometimes the revolution comes from within. That particular morning, I noticed things were off. Conversations stopped when I walked by. My assistant, usually chatty about her weekend plans, barely made eye contact. The security guard who always joked about the Knicks gave me a look I couldn't quite read. Was it pity? Warning? I dismissed it all as paranoia. The price of playing at this level. By noon, I would understand that paranoia and reality had merged into something far worse than I could have imagined. The call came from HR, asking me to come to the executive conference room. Just a routine matter, they said. But nothing was routine on the 48th floor. That's where careers went to die. As I walked through the halls I'd conquered, past the cubicles of analysts I'd mentored, beyond the offices of peers I'd outmaneuvered, I didn't know I was taking my last walk as Emily Hart, senior portfolio manager. I didn't know that in that conference room, surrounded by legal counsel and senior partners, my carefully constructed world would implode in a matter of minutes. Accusations of financial irregularities, falsified reports, insider trading implications, all lies, all carefully orchestrated, all devastating in their precision. The conference room smelled of leather and betrayal. Across the mahogany table sat Richard Brennan, senior partner, his face a mask of practiced concern. To his left, 2 lawyers from compliance, their manila folders thick with what I would soon learn were fabricated evidence. To his right sat Madison Clark, my protégé, her emerald eyes avoiding mine with surgical precision. "Emily, please sit," Richard said, his voice carrying the weight of a judge delivering a death sentence. "We need to discuss some serious irregularities in the Hartfield acquisition portfolio." The Hartfield deal, my crown jewel. A $200 million acquisition I'd orchestrated over 8 months, navigating regulatory hurdles and competing bids. It had earned the firm $12 million in fees and secured bonuses for my entire team. Now, apparently, it was my noose. What irregularities! I kept my voice steady, though my pulse hammered against my throat. The compliance officer, a thin man whose name I'd never bothered to learn, slid a document across the table. These trades, executed 3 days before the public announcement. Accounts traced back to an offshore entity in the Caymans. An entity, Ms. Hart, that received wire transfers from an account opened with your social security number. I stared at the papers, my mind racing through impossibilities. The signatures looked like mine. The account numbers were partially familiar, but I'd never seen these transactions, never authorized these transfers. This is impossible. I need to call my lawyer. That would be advisable, Richard said, his tone shifting from concern to distance. Effective immediately. You're suspended pending investigation. Security will escort you to clear your office. That's when Madison finally looked at me. 29 years old, Harvard MBA. Hungry in the way only someone who grew up with everything can be hungry for more. I'd brought her onto my team 2 years ago. Taught her everything. How to read between the lines of a balance sheet, how to sense fear in a negotiation, how to survive in this Shark Tank. Her expression wasn't guilty or triumphant, it was nothing. A void where gratitude should have lived. Madison will be taking over your responsibilities temporarily, Richard continued. She's been briefed on all your active accounts. Briefed, past tense. They'd been planning this. The walk to my office with security flanking me was a funeral procession. Heads turned, whispers followed, and I saw it all now. The choreography of my downfall. How Madison had volunteered to help with the Hartfield paperwork. How she'd had unusual access to my computer during those late nights when I'd trusted her to review documents. How she'd been having lunch with Richard's assistant for months. As I packed my personal items into a cardboard box, the corporate walk of shame in its most cliched form, Madison appeared in my doorway. Security stepped aside for her, the new queen surveying her conquered territory. Emily, she said quietly, I want you to know this wasn't personal. I looked at her, really looked at her. The Chanel suit I'd advised her to buy. The confidence I'd helped her build. The monster I'd created. Yes, it was. She tilted her head, a gesture I recognized because I'd taught it to her, how to appear thoughtful while calculating your next move. The industry's changing. Younger perspectives are needed. You were brilliant, but brilliance has an expiration date here. And you think you're immune. A smile, sharp as winter wind. I learned from others' mistakes. Within hours, my corporate email was deactivated. My keycard wouldn't open any doors. 12 years of relationships suddenly went dark, calls unreturned, texts unread. The financial press had the story by market close. Senior portfolio manager at Stratwell and Knox under investigation for insider trading. My name was poison. My reputation a cautionary tale told in whispers at happy hour. Madison's rise was equally swift. Youngest female senior portfolio manager in Stratwell and Knox history. The same journalists who'd printed my downfall now celebrated her ascent. She gave interviews about breaking glass ceilings, about mentorship and perseverance. She never mentioned my name, erasing me from her origin story like Stalin removing faces from photographs. But she'd made one crucial mistake, one that all predators make when they're young and drunk on their first kill. She'd left me alive. The first month after my termination, I didn't leave my Upper West Side apartment. The walls that once felt like a sanctuary now pressed in like a coffin. I'd watch the sunrise through unwashed windows, painting the city in false gold, and wonder if this was what dying felt like. Not the sudden stop, but the slow fade into irrelevance. My savings would last 8 months, maybe 9 if I gave up the apartment. The legal fees alone had already consumed $40,000. My lawyer's voice growing increasingly pessimistic with each billable hour. The evidence is sophisticated, he'd said. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing. No criminal charges had been filed yet. But the SEC investigation hung over me like a guillotine, waiting to drop. Friends, or people I'd thought were friends, disappeared like smoke. Rachel from Princeton, who'd been my maid of honor at the wedding to my now ex-husband, sent a text. "So sorry to hear. Need to lay low for a while. You understand?" I understood perfectly. In our world, scandal was contagious. By the second month, anger replaced despair. Not the hot, reckless kind that makes you key someone's car or send drunken emails at 2 a.m. This was cold, calculating fury that crystallized in my chest like ice. I started running again, 5 miles every morning along Riverside Park, my breath forming clouds in the February cold. With each stride, I planned. I began my research at the New York Public Library, away from digital footprints. Madison Clark, I dissected her life like a specimen. Born in Greenwich, Connecticut. Father a hedge fund manager who'd barely avoided prison in 2008. Mother a former model who sat on charity boards. Madison had been given everything but had always wanted what belonged to others. In college, she'd been accused of plagiarism, but Daddy's donation made it disappear. At her first job at Goldman Sachs, she'd lasted 18 months before a mysterious departure. I found a former colleague on LinkedIn who, after 3 drinks at a bar in Brooklyn, told me Madison had been sleeping with a married MD and threatening to expose him when he wouldn't promote her. Patterns. Beautiful, exploitable patterns. I studied her from afar, a ghost haunting her digital footprint. Her Instagram stories showed champagne brunches in the Hamptons, charity galas at the Met, yoga retreats in Tulum. But between the filtered photographs, I saw the cracks. The same desperation that had driven her to destroy me would drive her to destroy herself. She just needed the right opportunity. My notebook filled with observations, connections, weaknesses. Madison had a cocaine habit she thought was recreational. Her traits showed patterns, aggressive, borderline reckless, always pushing the edge of what was legal. She was brilliant, I'd give her that. But brilliance without wisdom is just a faster route to self-destruction. The plan formed slowly, like stalactites in a cave, each drop of information building something larger. I couldn't attack her directly. I was radioactive, my credibility destroyed. But I didn't need to attack. I just needed to create the conditions for her own nature to consume her. Late at night, when insomnia clawed at my skull, I'd stand at my window and look out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, Madison was probably at another networking event, another power dinner, collecting allies and accolades. She thought she'd learned from my mistakes, but she'd only learned how to take what wasn't hers. She hadn't learned the most important lesson of all. In this game, the biggest threat isn't the person shooting at you. It's the person who teaches you how to shoot yourself. By the 3rd month, I was ready. My lawyer had managed to stall the SEC investigation. Lack of concrete evidence beyond the circumstantial. The financial press had moved on to fresher scandals. I was yesterday's news, forgotten, irrelevant, perfect. I opened my laptop and began typing an email to an old contact at Carlyle Investments, Stratwell and Knox's biggest competitor. Marcus Chen owed me a favor from 5 years ago when I'd quietly warned him about a hostile takeover attempt. The subject line was simple. Regarding Madison Clark. The email was carefully crafted, each word chosen for maximum impact while maintaining plausible deniability. I wasn't spreading rumors or making accusations. I was simply sharing publicly available information about Madison's trading patterns, her client relationships, her remarkable success rate that bordered on statistically impossible. Marcus responded within an hour. Interesting. Coffee next week? I smiled, the first real smile in 3 months. Madison thought she'd buried me, but she'd only planted me, and in the dark, unseen, I was growing roots that would eventually strangle everything she'd stolen. The game wasn't over, it had just begun. The coffee shop in Brooklyn was deliberately chosen, far from Manhattan's financial district, invisible to anyone who mattered. Marcus Zhao sat across from me, his expression unreadable as he studied the documents I'd prepared. 3 months of meticulous research condensed into seemingly innocent observations. These trading patterns, he said quietly. They're aggressive. Brilliant, I corrected, maintaining the facade of admiration. Madison's brilliant, maybe too brilliant. You know how the SEC loves patterns that are too perfect? Marcus wasn't stupid. He knew exactly what I was doing. But more importantly, he knew the value of what I was offering. Information was currency in our world, and I was giving him gold. What do you want, Emily? Nothing. I'm out of the game. Remember? Just thought an old friend should know what his competition is doing. I paused, sipping my coffee. Especially since she's been poaching your clients. The Warrington account? That was yours until last Tuesday. His jaw tightened. I'd done my homework. Madison had indeed stolen a $50 million account from Carlyle. What Marcus didn't know was that I'd planted the seeds for that theft through anonymous tips to Madison's assistant about Warrington's dissatisfaction with Carlyle's conservative approach. Over the next 2 months, I became a ghost in the machine. Using burner phones and encrypted emails, I fed information to journalists about the Wonder Kid at Stratwell and Knox. Nothing defamatory, quite the opposite. I painted Madison as a genius, a prodigy whose returns consistently beat market predictions by margins that seemed almost supernatural. The financial press loved it. The Oracle of Wall Street, one headline proclaimed. The attention fed Madison's ego like gasoline on fire. She started taking bigger risks, leveraging positions that would make seasoned traders nervous. Her Instagram stories became more lavish. Private jets to Art Basel, tables at restaurants with year-long waiting lists, a new Birkin bag every month. Success was intoxicating her exactly as I'd predicted. Meanwhile, I orchestrated a delicate symphony of coincidences. A rumor here about Madison's relationship with a married client. A whisper there about unusual activity in accounts she managed. Nothing traceable to me, I was officially nobody. Living off savings, fighting legal battles. But the rumors found fertile ground in envious hearts. Wall Street loved building heroes, but it loved destroying them even more. The masterstroke came through an old client, Robert Henley, who still took my calls out of pity or loyalty. I didn't care which. His pharmaceutical company was about to announce a failed drug trial. Stock-crushing news that wouldn't go public for 2 weeks. I couldn't trade on this information. I was under investigation, every financial move scrutinized. But Madison could. Robert, I said during our call, I know I'm persona non grata, but Madison Clark is brilliant. You should meet with her about the Henley portfolio. She's exactly what your company needs right now. Aggressive, innovative, connected. The meeting was arranged. Madison, sensing opportunity, would definitely notice the subtle signs of distress in Robert's presentation. The nervous CFO, the carefully worded projections, the sudden push to restructure investments. She was too smart not to read between the lines, and too greedy not to act on it. I watched from afar as she took the bait. Through public filings tracked obsessively, I saw her shift major positions, shorting pharmaceutical stocks including Henley's, positioning herself to make millions when the news broke. Textbook insider trading. But she thought she was being clever, using offshore accounts and derivative instruments to hide her tracks. What she didn't know was that the SEC had been watching her for weeks. My anonymous tips about her supernatural success had triggered algorithms designed to detect insider trading. Every trade she made was being scrutinized, patterns analyzed, connections mapped. I also made sure certain documents found their way to the right people. Screenshots of Madison's private communications boasting about her edge in the market. Photos from her Instagram showing her at dinner with Robert Henley just days before her trades. Time zone stamps that placed her trades minutes after her meeting ended. The trap was beautiful in its simplicity. I hadn't framed Madison like she'd framed me with forged documents and fake accounts. I'd simply created an environment where her own greed and arrogance would flourish unchecked. Every illegal trade she made, every line she crossed, every risk she took, they were all her choices. I just made sure she had plenty of opportunities to choose wrong. By month 5 of my exile, Madison was flying higher than ever. The financial press couldn't get enough of her. She gave a TED Talk about fearless leadership in the digital age. She was on the cover of Forbes's 30 Under 30 issue. She had no idea that every accolade was another bar in the cage I was building around her. The higher she flew, the farther she had to fall. And unlike my destruction, which had been surgical and private, hers would be spectacular and very, very public. The seeds were planted. Now all I had to do was wait for the harvest. Madison's coronation came on a Thursday evening in June. The Rainbow Room, 65 floors above Manhattan, glittering with the kind of people who measured wealth in generations rather than dollars. Stratwell & Knox's annual client gala, an event I'd attended for 11 years until my disgrace made me a ghost. I watched it all through Instagram stories and Twitter feeds, a digital voyeur to my own replacement's triumph. Madison wore a custom Oscar de la Renta gown, black silk that probably cost more than most Americans made in a month. The firm's senior partners flanked her like proud parents, Richard Brennan's arm around her shoulder as he introduced her to billionaire clients. Our youngest senior portfolio manager, he was quoted saying in the Wall Street Journal Society pages. Madison represents the future of Stratwell & Knox. Brilliant, innovative, fearless. Fearless, I almost laughed. Alone in my apartment with takeout Chinese and a bottle of wine that cost $12 instead of $1,200. Fear was what kept you alive in this business. Madison's fearlessness was just another word for recklessness. The Forbes article came out the next week. Madison on the cover, arms crossed, standing in front of the windows of what used to be my office. The Millennial Midas, How Madison Clark is Revolutionizing Wall Street. The interviewer, a young journalist clearly dazzled by Madison's charm, painted her as a revolutionary, someone breaking the old boys club rules and writing her own. I don't believe in limits, Madison was quoted saying. The old guard played it safe, followed outdated rules. My generation understands that fortune favors the bold. The old guard. That was me. Apparently. 37 years old and already a relic in Madison's narrative. Her trades became increasingly aggressive. The Henley Pharmaceutical short had netted her clients $8 million in profits when the failed drug trial was announced. Success bred hunger for more success. She started leveraging positions at ratios that made me nervous just reading about them in public filings. She was using complex derivatives to hide the real exposure. But I could see through the maze. I'd taught her half these tricks, after all. The party circuit consumed her evenings. Every charity gala, every gallery opening, every exclusive event. Madison was there. Photographed with celebrities and politicians, her social media following growing exponentially. She gave interviews about work-life balance while clearly having neither work nor life, just an endless performance of success. Her assistant, a nervous young man named Trevor, whom I'd found on LinkedIn, started posting his own social media updates. Nothing violating his NDA, just lifestyle posts. Reservation confirmations at impossible-to-book restaurants. Pictures of the view from Madison's new corner office. Subtle brags that painted a picture of excess that would have been unseemly, even in the go-go 80s. I made sure certain people saw these posts. Journalists working on pieces about income inequality. SEC investigators looking for patterns of conspicuous consumption that often accompanied financial crimes. The district attorney's office, which had been increasingly interested in white-collar crime since the last election. Madison's cocaine habit, which I'd tracked through her association with a dealer who worked the Goldman Sachs crowd, was becoming less recreational and more necessary. She was sleeping 4 hours a night, running on stimulants and ambition. Her Instagram stories at 3 a.m. showed her still in the office, pupils dilated, talking about grinding while others sleep. The most beautiful part was Madison's growing paranoia about her peers. Success had made her suspicious. She'd stolen her position, so she assumed everyone was trying to steal from her. She'd frozen out potential allies, fired talented analysts who might threaten her, created a circle of sycophants who told her only what she wanted to hear. At the Hamptons White Party in July, an event I watched through the social media posts of attendees, Madison gave a speech about disrupting the disruption. She was drunk on champagne and her own mythology. talking about how she'd transformed Stratwell and Knox's portfolio strategy, how she'd brought in younger clients who understood the future. Richard Brennan stood beside her, smiling. But I knew that smile. It was the same one he'd worn the day before he fired me. The partners were happy to ride Madison's wave, but waves eventually crash. And when they did, the partners would step back and let her drown alone. By August, Madison was managing almost $4 billion in assets, nearly double what I'd overseen. The financial press called her the Queen of Wall Street. She was invited to speak at Davos. There were rumors of a book deal, a masterclass series, a documentary. She'd also made 17 trades that, if examined closely, showed a pattern of insider information. Her leverage ratios were approaching dangerous levels, hidden in a web of offshore entities and derivative instruments. Her client acquisition methods included promises that no legitimate manager could keep. And somewhere in the Cayman Islands, accounts linked to her social security number, accounts she didn't know existed, that I'd created using the same methods she'd used to frame me, were accumulating suspicious transfers. The stage was set. The spotlight was burning bright. Madison Clark, the millennial Midas, the Queen of Wall Street, the future of finance, stood at her zenith. She just didn't realize she was standing on a trapdoor. And I was holding the lever. The first crack appeared on a Tuesday morning in September. A small item in the Financial Times Market Watch section, SEC examining trading patterns at major investment firms. Madison's name wasn't mentioned, but I knew the investigation had found its target. The algorithms I'd helped trigger were doing their work, following the breadcrumbs of impossible returns and perfectly timed trades. Madison didn't notice. She was in Tokyo that week, closing a deal with a Japanese pension fund worth $200 million in managed assets. Her Instagram showed her at Nobu Tokyo, champagne toasts with executives, the Tokyo skyline glittering behind her like conquered territory. But back in New York, the machinery of justice was slowly grinding forward. The U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District had quietly opened a preliminary investigation. I knew because I'd made sure certain documents reached them. Not forged ones like Madison had used against me, but real communications, real trades, real evidence of her real crimes. The second crack came through a whistleblower inside Stratwell and Knox. Not someone I'd planted, but a junior analyst Madison had humiliated in a meeting for questioning one of her trades. He'd gone to compliance with concerns about irregularities in the Henley pharmaceutical trades. Compliance had initially dismissed him, but when the SEC started asking questions, suddenly his concerns became very interesting. Madison returned from Tokyo to find two federal investigators waiting in Stratwell and Knox's lobby. They were discreet, professional, just asking routine questions about trading strategies and client communications. Madison handled it well. I heard through the grapevine, calm, cooperative, providing documents that showed nothing obviously wrong. But paranoia, once it takes root, grows like cancer. Madison started making mistakes. She tried to delete emails, not knowing that Stratwell and Knox's servers backed up everything. She reached out to Robert Henley, attempting to create a retroactive paper trail that would justify her trades. She moved money between accounts, trying to obscure connections that had already been documented. Each action was another thread the investigators could pull. The forensic accountants found patterns in her trades that matched insider information with 94% accuracy, far beyond coincidence. Her assistant, Trevor, when questioned, broke immediately, revealing late-night calls with clients that violated numerous regulations. The Wall Street Journal got wind of the investigation in early October. The headline was cautious: SEC investigating trading practices at Stratwell and Knox. But Madison's name was in the second paragraph. Her meteoric rise now reframed as a potential cautionary tale. Her clients started calling. The Japanese pension fund wanted clarification. The Warrington account expressed concerns. Richard Brennan assigned a support team to help Madison, corporate speak for babysitters who would watch her every move. Madison's social media went dark. No more Instagram stories from exclusive restaurants. No more LinkedIn posts about disrupting finance. But I had eyes everywhere now, Former colleagues who'd been neutral in my downfall were suddenly very interested in sharing gossip about Madison's unraveling. She'd lost weight, they said. She was in the office until 3 a.m. every night, poring over trades, trying to find explanations that would satisfy investigators. Her cocaine habit had escalated. She'd been seen meeting her dealer in broad daylight, too stressed to be careful. Her hands shook in meetings. She snapped at assistants, alienated allies, turned the office toxic with her fear. The forensic accountants found the Cayman accounts in week 3 of their investigation. The ones I'd created using her leaked personal information, following the same blueprint she'd used against me. But these accounts had received actual transfers from her legitimate trades, transfers she'd made thinking they were going to different offshore entities she controlled. I'd simply redirected them, creating a pattern that looked exactly like money laundering. By Halloween, Madison was suspended, pending investigation. The same conference room where I'd been destroyed became her interrogation chamber. But unlike my case, built on forged evidence that would eventually fall apart, Madison's case was built on her own actions. Every illegal trade, every insider tip, every line crossed, she'd done it all herself. I just made sure everyone was watching. The partners at Stratwell and Knox moved swiftly to contain the damage. Madison's clients were redistributed to other managers. Her office was cleared out overnight. Her nameplate disappeared from the directory. It was as if she'd never existed, except for the ongoing investigation that threatened to take down anyone associated with her. The financial press that had crowned her now circled like vultures. The Fall of the Millennial Midas. Bloomberg's headline read, "The Forbes article was quietly removed from their website. Those screenshots lived forever on financial gossip blogs." Madison hired the same lawyer I'd used, an irony that wasn't lost on me. But unlike my case, where the evidence eventually proved fabricated, every document in Madison's case was authentic. She'd created her own downfall with every greedy trade, every crossed line, every risk taken in pursuit of profit and glory. The noose was tightening. The trap was closing. And Madison Clark, who'd thought herself so clever in destroying me, was about to learn that in the game of revenge, the winner isn't the one who strikes first, it's the one who strikes last. The shareholder meeting was scheduled for November 15th at the Marriott Marquise in Times Square. Stratwell and Knox's annual gathering of its most powerful investors, pension funds, sovereign wealth funds, billionaires who trusted the firm with generational wealth. Madison was supposed to have been a keynote presenter, showcasing the record returns she'd generated. Instead, she would be the main topic of discussion behind closed doors. I attended, not as Emily Hart, disgraced former portfolio manager, but as a representative of a small family office that had maintained its account with Stratwell and Knox. A wig, different makeup, glasses, enough to be unrecognizable from across a crowded ballroom. I needed to witness the final act. The meeting started at 9 a.m. sharp. Richard Brennan took the podium. His usual commanding presence diminished by the weight of scandal. The FBI had raided Stratwell and Knox's offices the previous week, carrying out boxes of documents. News helicopters had circled the building like vultures over a carcass. "Ladies and gentlemen," Brennan began, his voice steady but strained. "We are committed to full cooperation with all investigations. The actions of one individual do not represent the values of this institution." One individual. Madison had already been erased from the firm's narrative, reduced to a nameless mistake. The questions from shareholders were brutal. How had oversight failed so spectacularly? What was the firm's exposure to legal liability? Were client funds secure? A representative from the Norwegian Sovereign Wealth Fund stood up, his voice cutting through the room. "We've lost $40 million due to positions that are now under investigation. Who is accountable?" That's when Madison arrived. She wasn't supposed to be there. Her lawyers had surely advised against it. But pride and desperation make people do stupid things. She walked through the main doors in a black Chanel suit, her face gaunt, her signature confidence replaced by something wild and dangerous. "I'm accountable," she announced, her voice carrying across the ballroom. Security started moving toward her, but she was already at the microphone. but so is everyone in this room who celebrated my success when it lined your pockets. The room erupted. Shareholders shouted questions. Reporters who'd snuck in started recording. Security tried to escort Madison out, but she gripped the podium like a life raft. "You want to know about insider trading?" she laughed, the sound sharp and broken. "Ask Richard about his golf games with pharmaceutical executives. Ask the compliance team why they only started caring when the SEC showed up. Ask—" The microphone cut off. Security reached her, but she kept shouting, her voice raw. "I learned everything from the best, from Emily Hart. She taught me how this game really works." My name, thrown like a grenade into the crowd. People turned, looking for me, but I was already moving toward the exit, anonymous in the chaos. Madison was dragged out, still screaming about corruption, about double standards, about how she was just the scapegoat. Some of it was probably true. Wall Street had always been corrupt in its perfectly legal ways, but Madison had crossed the clear lines, the ones even the corrupt wouldn't touch because they threatened the whole system. The next day, the U.S. Attorney's Office announced formal charges: securities fraud, wire fraud, insider trading, conspiracy to commit money laundering. 17 counts total, each carrying potential decades in prison. The Cayman accounts I'd created were cited as evidence of long-term criminal intent. Her actual trades provided the proof of guilt. Madison's parents hired the best defense money could buy, a team from White & Case that cost $2,000 an hour. But even the best lawyers couldn't explain away the pattern of trades that preceded major market moves by hours or days. They couldn't justify the offshore accounts, the deleted emails, the witness testimony from multiple sources. The trial was set for spring. Madison was released on $5 million bail. Her passport confiscated, an ankle monitor tracking her every move. Her Instagram account was deleted. Her LinkedIn showed only her name and a single word: entrepreneur. The Madison Clark who'd conquered Wall Street was gone, replaced by a defendant in a federal criminal case. I watched her arraignment from the gallery, another anonymous face in the crowd. She looked smaller in the courtroom, her designer suit unable to armor her against the weight of justice. When the judge read the charges, each count landing like a physical blow, I saw her flinch. When bail was set, her mother sobbed. When she was led away for processing, her father's face showed the kind of shame that money couldn't wash away. As I left the courthouse, walking past the news vans and protesters with their "Jail the Bankers" signs, I felt something I hadn't expected: emptiness. The revenge I'd orchestrated so carefully, the trap I'd set so perfectly, had worked exactly as planned. Madison Clark was destroyed, more thoroughly than she'd destroyed me. But I was still destroyed too. My reputation remained in ruins. My career was still ashes. The revenge had consumed 8 months of my life, every waking hour devoted to her downfall. Standing on the courthouse steps, watching Madison's parents help her into a Blacktown car, I realized the truth. In the game of revenge, there are no winners, only survivors. The spring trial never came. Madison Clark pled guilty to 3 counts of securities fraud in exchange for the prosecutors dropping the remaining charges. 7 years in minimum security federal prison, 3 years probation, and a lifetime ban from working in financial services. The judge called her crimes a betrayal of market integrity and public trust. I wasn't in the courtroom for the sentencing. I was in Seattle, 3,000 miles away, interviewing for a position at a small environmental investment firm. They knew about my past. I'd been upfront about the investigation, which had been quietly dropped 6 months earlier when the fabricated evidence became apparent. But they also knew my real track record, the 12 years of legitimate success before Madison's betrayal. "Everyone deserves a second chance," the CEO had said, "especially someone who was clearly wronged." I took the job. Lower salary, smaller office, no view of any river. But it was honest work with people who valued integrity over meteoric rises. I found an apartment in Capitol Hill, started running in Discovery Park, began rebuilding not just a career, but a life. The news of Madison's sentencing reached me through a Google alert I'd forgotten to turn off, a small item in the Wall Street Journal. barely 3 paragraphs. She'd cried during her allocution, apologizing to her clients, her firm, her family. She never mentioned my name. In her version of events, she was a young woman corrupted by Wall Street's culture of greed, a victim of the very system she'd once claimed to be revolutionizing. I deleted the Google alert and went for a run. 6 months later, I received a letter forwarded from my old address. No return address, but I recognized the handwriting. Madison's perfect prep school cursive, now shaky and uncertain. Emily, it read. I know you orchestrated everything. I can't prove it, and even if I could, who would believe the convicted felon over the victim? You won. But I need you to know something. I'm sorry. Not for what happened to me. I earned that. But for what I did to you. I destroyed an innocent person for ambition. You destroyed a guilty one for justice. We're not the same. You're better than me. You always were. M. I held the letter for a long time, standing in my Seattle kitchen, rain pattering against the windows. Then I lit a match from the stove and watched it burn in the sink. The last connection between us turned to ash and washed away. Madison Clark served 4 years and 8 months of her sentence, released early for good behavior. Last I heard, she was teaching yoga in Connecticut, living with her parents, trying to rebuild from nothing. The same starting point she'd left me with. Except she had family money to cushion the fall. We'd probably never cross paths again. Wall Street was closed to both of us now. Her by law, me by choice. Sometimes, late at night. I think about that conference room where it all started. The mahogany table, the leather chairs, the view of Manhattan that promised everything and delivered nothing but pain. I think about the woman I was, ambitious, trusting, believing that hard work and talent were enough. I think about the woman I became, calculating, patient, capable of destroying another human being with surgical precision. I'm neither of those women now. I'm someone else, someone who learned that revenge is a poison you drink hoping others will die. Madison drank deeply and destroyed herself. I sipped carefully and survived. But the taste lingers. The financial world spins on without us. New prodigies rise and fall. The same crimes dress themselves in different suits. The game continues with new players who think they've learned from our mistakes but are really just preparing to make their own. My new office has a view of Mount Rainier on clear days. I manage ethical investments for foundations and NGOs, helping money do good instead of just make more money. It's smaller, quieter, less prestigious. It's also honest. I sleep without pills now. I can look at myself in the mirror without seeing a stranger. This morning, the Seattle Times ran a story about a young executive at Amazon accused of insider trading. 28 years old, Harvard MBA, called herself disruptive and fearless. I read it over coffee, noting the familiar patterns, the predictable trajectory from genius to defendant. Then I closed the paper and went to work. My war was over. I'd won by surviving, by rebuilding, by choosing not to let revenge define my entire life. Madison Clark was a chapter, not the whole book. The rain had stopped, sunlight broke through the clouds, illuminating the mountain in the distance. It was going to be a beautiful day in Seattle, 3,000 miles from Wall Street, in a life I'd never planned but had learned to love. The silent trap had caught its prey. But in the end, I was the one who escaped. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Drop a comment below and let's connect. If you enjoyed this revenge tale from the corporate world, please subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts. What would you have done in Emily's position? I can't wait to hear your perspectives.